Thank you, Duran. Thank you, everyone, and good evening. Um, we're welcome to the NLI's online reading room events, and especially tonight to the fourth and last lecture in the series of Outstanding Archives. So my name is Matan Barzilai, head of the Archives Department, and I'm honored to be sharing this event with our American friends at the NLI USA as part of the NLI USA Signature Speaker Series, which takes place every month throughout the year. And we are also honored to have Adina Canfield with us. Adina is the CEO of NLI USA, and she will summarize your comments and questions that you're invited to raise up in the chat throughout the lecture. So after this short introduction, I would like to present our special speaker tonight. This is obviously Gary Wexler. Gary is the pioneer in the field of advertising and marketing of Jewish content. Today, Gary is a professor in the University of Southern California's Annenberg School of Communication, as well as being a consultant and a writer. But he started his career working for 20 years in major advertising agencies as a copywriter and a creative director with corporate giants such as Apple and Coca-Cola among his clients and many, many others. But then Gary turned to the nonprofit world, where he worked with more than 1,000 nonprofits and foundations around the world. And it was during this part of his career that he was like pulled by his Jewish heart towards the world of Jewish advertising, a world that we know today with a perspective of 30 years that Gary actually created with his own hands. And this is a word that reflects and expresses the whispered desires of Jews around the world and the common hopes and prayers of Jews in the modern lives. And I think Gary Wexler managed to capture these common hopes and visions in compelling images and pithy phrases, transforming them into the winning advertising campaigns of Jewish lives. So this is the reason why we all gathered here tonight in this Zoom event. And Gary, we're very happy that you're with us tonight. It did cross my mind that maybe the real reason that you became a pioneer in this Jewish advertising world was to write your place in the NLI archives, along with great personalities such as Franz Kafka and Stefan Zweig and Hannah Senesh, Shai Agnon, Grossman, and David Grossman, and many, many others. And whether you thought about it or not, today your thoughts and your creativity and your imagination is laying beside the creativity of those great giants. And I think this reflects the diversity of the archives, NLI archives, that combine together the great ideas of different personalities, different thoughts, different societies also, that all gather up together in the archives of the National Library. And we're very happy you're with us. I think I'm going to be quiet from now on. Maybe I'll have a few comments during your lecture, but from now on, the stage is yours, and we are all curious to hear you and to hear what you have to tell us.
So first of all, Matan, thank you. It means a lot to me, everything that you've just said, because you often wonder throughout your career, are you accomplishing anything? Does it mean anything? Particularly when you're working in advertising or communication. And then when I chose to work in the nonprofit world, in the Jewish world, and I say to myself, did this have any meaning? And so when the archive came to the National Library of Israel, I thought to myself, oh my God, this actually did have some meaning. So I want to start out telling the audience how this archive even came to the National Library, because it isn't something that people would normally think would be part of a library's archives. So 2 years ago, I live in Los Angeles. By the way, everybody, thank you for coming. It means a lot to me that you're all here. And it's morning here, so it's evening there, and good afternoon and evening to everybody. Anyway, I was cleaning out my garage 2 years ago for my grandchildren, putting up the electric trains, the Lionel electric trains from the 1950s that my father had put together for me. And the garage needed to be cleaned out. And in the garage were a ton of my advertising portfolios. And I thought, what am I saving this stuff for? So I started to throw out the portfolios, the Apple portfolio, the Coca-Cola one, the Intel, the Nissan, all of it. And I thought, I don't need this stuff. And then I hadn't looked into the portfolios of Jewish advertising that I did for literally 10 years. I was getting ready to throw it out, and I opened it up, and the stuff fell out, and my mouth fell open, even though I knew all these ads. And I said to myself, oh my God, I never realized what I was doing here. This represents a 20-year era, a 20-year history of what was happening in Jewish life all over the world with all these clients I was working with in the United States, in Canada, in Israel, all the events that went on for 20 years, whether it was peace signings, whether it was terrorism, whether it was Jewish education, whether it was fundraising for buildings that were being built, whatever it was reflected in this creative medium. And I thought to myself, probably never before in the world has any era been captured in an advertising campaigns that are telling a history in this way. And I realized I had something here. I thought, I can't throw this away, but I don't know what to do with it. And my very good friend, Naomi Schechter, who works for the library, was in Los Angeles doing some fundraising. And I told her about this. And she said, send some photos to us and let's see. I sent some photos, and I hear back from Matan. He says, in fact, this stuff is very interesting to us. And then when I brought it to Israel, they said, it will be an ephemera archive. I said, what does that mean? What's ephemera? I had no idea what this was. So that's how this all ended up here. Now, I want to say several things before I start showing the ads. First of all, given the situation today, what's happening in the world with Israel, with the Jewish community, the rise in anti-Semitism, I realize that this archive now has more relevancy than ever, because it has not all the answers in it in any way, but it does have some answers in it. It has some history in it in demonstration about two very important things to us. One, how Jews speak to one another, and how Jews speak to the world. That is the importance that I'm realizing, is the relevancy that's in there. And notice I am using the word speaking synonymous with communication, because there has been a major change that's happened in the world as far as communication goes. We used to talk about advertising, we used to talk about marketing, we would talk about public relations. Today, we're talking communication as the umbrella on all of this. And the reason is if you say that the world has been changed by technology, at the center of technology is the internet. The internet, more than anything, is a communication tool. It has given way to social media, to all the change that is happening today. Nothing happens in the world today without there being a very major communication component. And if we look what Israel has just been through in the last month, half of the battle may be the military battle, but the other half is the communication battle. And until we, as the Jewish people, learn to be able to honor and accept and hold the importance of the communication battle, we are not going to be able to achieve the objectives that we want to achieve. And I'm not talking here my own political views or anything else. This is in general the way that we need to be able to start understanding this. And today you're looking at media. And I want to say just a few more things before I begin about media. Media has changed. A lot of what you're going to see that I'm going to show you today would never be done today, because ad campaigns aren't paid attention to in the same way that they were in the era that I was doing this, between the late 1980s into about 2010. It has changed vastly. And I have to say that the people that we are in communication battles against or with understand this a lot better than we do, because the way that things work today, You are looking at events that then start to become the engine of which social media follows, of which communication tools follow, advertising will follow. And you have to look at the events, what's created and what happens, and then be able to understand. And I can get more into this as time goes on. So I want to start showing you here the first ads in Begin to Talk, okay? Hold on. Okay. Okay. Now, as you are looking at this, whoops, I'm sorry, that went back. You need, when you are creating messages and communication, to understand your audience where they are and speak to them where they are rather than from your perspective of where you are. You need to capture an audience. These first ads that I'm showing you were the very first Jewish ads that I did. They were done for the CAGE conference, the Conference on the Advancement of Jewish Education in 1988. They were having what they called their bar mitzvah year in Israel. No one in the Jewish world at that point, and I was already a major person in ad agencies, had come to me and said, how do you apply marketing to what we're doing in Jewish life? As a matter of fact, people at Federation said to me, oh, that's very crass, we don't market. And I said, you're gonna have to learn how to be able to do this. So I pulled 7 Jews out of the ad agency where I was the creative director and said to them, I'm going to Jerusalem to present a campaign on Jewish education, and you people are the perfect audience, non-involved Jews, to convince you to send your children to some sort of form of Jewish education. And they worked with me on this campaign, but I'm showing you a few of the ads that I actually did. And having the understanding of the Jewish world. And that's one of the things I want to say is, to communicate for the Jewish world, you have to have an understanding and a sensitivity. It's not like you're communicating about pots and pans. There is deep, sensitive, nuanced understanding and information. At the time that I did this ad, what was happening in the Jewish world was the Jew in the lotus. Jews were going to India, gurus, all these things were happening. People were talking about, and we had a whole lot of young Jews who were defecting from Judaism because they wanted these exotic Eastern religions. So I wrote this ad. There's an exotic religion out there that embraces meditation, pursues mysticism, talks of inner light, and has a diet all its own. It may already be yours. That was the first ad in the series. The next one, how do you pull in Jews that in a way that's going to speak to them at a basic level they can all understand? Realize we were not speaking in this to Jews who were particularly involved or educated, but moved according to stereotypes, moved according to basic Jewish knowledge. And so this was where this came from. There's one word in every language that evokes an immediate emotional response: Jew. It gives us a platform to begin talking to other Jews because everyone can relate to this in some way, and there is a truth in this. So you don't start talking to them about all the deep things. And this is one of the things I had to convince the Jewish educational establishment at the time. You cannot talk in ads, you cannot talk Torah to the general Jewish audience. They don't understand if they're not there. You've got to put yourself in their place. You know, folks, it gets to like at Pesach, B'chol dor vador chayav adam et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, a Jew has to look at himself as if he went out of Egypt, meaning we got to put ourselves in other people's shoes. So when we are speaking to other Jews, we have to realize where they're at, not where we think they should be at. Okay, the next one in this series. This Hanukkah, when you give your children a present, also give them a past and a future. Now, what was the strategy behind this year? The strategy was that almost every Jew celebrates Hanukkah in some way, even if they're celebrating Christmas. So we were talking to them about something they could understand. Now, before I move on, I want to say something else here. The issue of creativity, the issue of concept, that you don't just say it, it's how you say it. This is, in a sense, a lost art today, particularly in the Jewish world. What's happening in the Jewish world is we are not talking conceptually to people. We're not even particularly talking emotionally to them. What's happened is a lot of the communication people are people who are coming in from Washington, D.C. as policy people who then switch into the Jewish world, or they're PR people, and they're always talking messaging, 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 be on message. That may be true, but what's being lost is the conceptual aspect of how do you create a conceptual idea of engagement so that you pull on people's heartstrings, which gets into another major discussion here. In order to do this kind of work, you have to understand several things. First of all, you've got to be able to talk to the Jewish soul. The Jews aren't moving intellectually through these issues. We move emotionally, and then we may get the intellect. We have to communicate from soul to Jewish soul. You've got to understand the Jewish soul. You've got to be in touch with your own Jewish soul. And then you've got to look at the tangibles and intangibles. There's tangible messages. Yes, we have to do this. Yes, we need to raise money for this. Yes, we need to make this happen. But then there is the intangible of the Jewish soul. Why, as Jews, are we doing these things? What component of our Jewish soul is this particular cause about? What is this organization about? You need to be educated and to understand in order to be able to be effective and make these things happen. Next, okay, now, hold on, before I get back to that one, let me talk controversy here. Realize these ads are representative of a particular era. In the late 1980s, we weren't sensitive in the ways that we have become today and should be today. So the word shiksa, which today is looked at as a pejorative term, was not looked at in such a way then. This ad was the ad that ended up on the front pages of Jewish newspapers everywhere, including the Jerusalem Post, about this campaign, because it started to get a lot of wide coverage and people resonated, and it started a huge conversation. It was the beginning of the Jewish population survey when it showed that a majority or a large percentage of Jews were beginning to marry out and everything. And so this ad was done for that. Moses married a shiksa too. And it started this huge, as I said, discussion and platform. Please don't start emailing me right now saying, how could you say that? How could you? Let's remember it represented that era, and this was the way people spoke then. We would never do this now, nor should we. Next. Okay, now, there were issues in Jewish life that people did not want to talk about in those era. In that era, Jewish men never battered Jewish women. There were always nice Jewish boys. So this ad for the LA Jewish Federation caused a huge stir for Jewish family services. You'd be surprised how many nice Jewish boys aren't. And the uproar on this was tremendous at the time. How could you show this? How could you talk about this? How could you say this? It was a different era. But notice something else, folks. Again, this is conceptual. There is a creativity. We didn't just say Jewish men are battering Jewish women. We found a way to say it that hit somebody between the eyes. This is what I'm saying has become the lost art today. The next one, for Jewish AIDS services. Jewish men didn't get AIDS. Jewish men weren't homosexuals. Jewish men this and that. And of course it wasn't true, but this was what people wanted to believe. So we did this ad. Yesterday we took this, unfortunately this young man had died, and we took his photo from his bar mitzvah. Yesterday he was a man, today he is a memory. So let me explain something else here. You needed to understand Jewish life to know that people always say on a bar mitzvah, today the kid becomes a man. If you don't have that Jewish understanding, you cannot say these things. So this is where Jewish understanding was very important, and also the impact, again, of being able to say this is what's happening to Jews without coming out and saying, you see, there are Jewish men dying of AIDS. The other thing is again, this is conceptual. Let's go to his bar mitzvah. Let's bring it out. There is an emotion there. Okay, we did a billboard. We did a series of billboards in LA for the Federation. So on one side, it said what they did, but then each billboard had a different headline. This one said, battles of biblical proportion waged daily, being able to connect us to the people of the book. Next, okay. Now, there was a series of ads we were doing for the Jewish Federation. It was the first time they had ever done any kind of advertising. And let me explain to you how this all came about. We had an earthquake here. I'm sorry, this was before the earthquake. In 1991, we had an uprising here in Los Angeles over the Rodney King situation. A Black man who was pulled over by the police in Los Angeles. And it started a lot of discussion. And I jumped into this and started working with different nonprofits about how they could begin to market their messages as a result of what was going on in the city. And so that was when the Federation became acquainted, even though I had been involved more so with my work and what I was doing. And so we had this earthquake in 1994, and the Federation called me and said, we're doing earthquake relief. The media is all over us. Can you come in and help out? So I came in to help out for the month when nobody was working in LA because all the infrastructure was down. And at the end, when I went back to work, I said to the Federation, the earthquake isn't your issue. You have no marketing going on. And that's how a lot of this all began at this point. So this was the first campaign that I did for them, okay? It's time to begin the real discussion about Jews and money. And I want to read just the beginning of some of the copy here. If the stereotype that all Jews were wealthy had any validity, we wouldn't be running this ad. In fact, there are as many as 60,000 Jews in Los Angeles who live below the poverty line. And then it goes in and explains the needs. And then the last paragraph said, this year, the world situation demands that we raise more money than ever before. You know it can be done because there's one true thing you can say about Jews and how they handle money. They give it. So you look also to stereotypes is a very effective way to be able to speak to Jews. The problem with this ad today is that because of Twitter, because of Instagram, most new generation folks, they don't read long copy. You've got to get to them like this in the way that you do it. So these ads would probably never be able to be effective today, which is unfortunate. The next one, and this one caused a huge controversy. Not all Jews shop on Rodeo. Just like all other people, Jews fall into a variety of economic brackets. Most of us don't drive Mercedes or eat out every night or live in Beverly Hills. Now, the problem with this ad was that so many of the donors at the Federation did shop on Rodeo, did live in Beverly Hills, did drive Mercedes. I was almost massacred for this ad. So it was a mistake, but it was a great ad. It raised a lot of profile, though, and controversy, but it wasn't sensitive. But realize I was at the beginning of all of this. So I was learning the sensitivities of the Jewish world. And boy, did I have to start learning them, because we're a very, look at, Am Kashe Orlech, a stiff-necked people. We are a very sensitive people. Okay. This ad would work as well today as it did then. American Jews are divided over Israel's policies, not her existence. Now, today, there's a lot of Jews also who would question the existence. In those days, we didn't. But this was also a very editorial ad. And so I want to read you the beginning of this one, too. No community is in unanimous agreement about the policy of its leaders. The Jews are no exception. In Israel itself, there is much open debate. After all, Israel is a democracy. Gone are the days when the entire Jewish community spoke with one voice over Israel's actions. Today, we are as familiar and as a result as splintered about Israeli policies as the Israelis themselves. So we could have a huge discussion about this ad and stop right here, but I'm going to go on. Okay, now this next campaign I'm going to show you. This was, I was in the former Soviet Union in the late 1990s. And the Cummings Foundation Jewish Life Program, which was run by a wonderful human being who has since passed away, Rabbi Rachel Cohen. And Rachel came to me and she said, we want to do a campaign about what we are doing in Russia right now, working with the revival of Jewish life. She said, we're going to take you to Russia and we need you to start covering and seeing what's going on there. It turned out to be an unbelievable experience from multiple levels. And I just wrote a blog about this for the National Library of Israel. There were so many, it was so astounding because this was a very controversial campaign. This will be Jewish agency and Jewish organizations. They had cultivated the American Jewish community to believe that every Jew should be leaving Russia. These people, the Cummings Foundation, were working with the Jews who were staying and helping them build Jewish life. So this was counter the narrative of what we were hearing at the time and what we were being led to believe. And people were very staunch. They all need to be leaving. They must be leaving. They took me to Russia and it opened my eyes to a situation, but also I'll just tell you one story that became very personal. They took me out to this little village in central Ukraine called Korsun-Shevchenkovsky. And in Korsun-Shevchenkovsky, there was a story that before the fall of the Soviet Union, there were some women who had created an anti-nuclear march going through Poland, Ukraine, and other places in Eastern and Central Europe. And one of the organizers was a woman named Sally Gratch from Chicago, and Sally was a Jewish activist. Sally wore a Jewish star around her neck, and so did a few other Jewish women. And they go through Poland, and nobody ever mentions it to them. They get into Ukraine, Western Ukraine, nothing. They get to Central Ukraine, to this little village, of course, in Shevchenkovsky, and this little man comes up to them and in Yiddish says to them, "Are you Jewish?" And they said, "Yes." And they said, "How many Jews are in the town?" And he said, "I wouldn't know because people won't tell you." And they said, "Do you know any?" He said, "Yes, I know a few." They pointed to a hill and they said, "Tonight is Shabbat. We're going to meet up there on that hill. Please tell whatever Jews you know to tell whatever Jews they know, and we're going to do a Shabbat service up there." 6 hours later, 500 people arrived on the hill, and they began to realize that there must be a significant Jewish population in this area. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they found that there were 5,000 Jews in what was called the Oblast, which is like the county in the area. So they bring me out to Korsun-Shevchenkovsky, and I stand before about 200 people in this broken down, torn up auditorium. People in the town itself looked like Fiddler on the Roof. There were people with oxen and people with donkey carts and outhouses next to people's homes, and there was unpaved roads. And I'm looking, I think, oh my God. And my grandfather had come from Ukraine, and I thought this was the world that they came from. So I have to get up there and I introduce myself and I say, "My name is Gary Wexler," and I pronounce it Wexler. And there's this murmur in the crowd. And I said, "My grandfather came from Ukraine," and somebody asked where. I said, "Well, he came from a little shtetl that disappeared during World War II. And I said, "I've asked a few people about it here, but no one's ever heard about it." Somebody said, "What's the name?" I said, "Zhivitov." And this screen goes up and they said, "It's here in the Oblast, in this area. You're one of us." And it hit me like this. And I looked out at the poverty and also looked out at all the gold teeth in the front of people's mouths and everything. And I thought to myself, thank you to my grandfather for getting us out of here, because this place is really depressive and everything. But they were creating Jewish life. Anyway, let me show you some of the campaign of the revival of Jewish life in the former Soviet Union. So this was the major saying I kept hearing everywhere I went. The more who leave, the more who stay. And I said to them, what does that mean? And they said, you would think that the numbers of our community would diminish because so many people are leaving and going to Israel and going to the United States and going to Germany and going to other places. But every day, more people come out of the woodwork in every community and announce that they are Jewish. They just keep coming forward and coming forward. I want to say the other person who ran this organization was Martin Horowitz, who has also passed away. He was an amazing person to be working with. So we did 6 ads. I'm going to show you a few of the ads. They took me through this school building of a Jewish school, and I'm walking through and I realize these are all old Soviet buildings. And all of a sudden I see this doorway where up on top is still the hammer and sickle, and beneath it is the Aleph Bet. And I thought to myself, the whole story is right here. It's right here in this picture. So this was the first ad in the series. Look at this photo from top to bottom. The whole story is right here. And I have to look away to read you a little bit of the copy on this. When did you ever think that in a Moscow schoolroom, you would see the hammer and sickle as a relic of the past and the Hebrew alphabet as a statement of the present and the future? And these were just astounding moments for me. The next ad in the series, they took me, I was there on Simchat Torah, and they took me to the Archipova synagogue in Moscow. The Archipova synagogue was always the synagogue in Moscow, but nobody had ever been going to it, very few people. And when they did, it was crawling with KGB. And so people stayed away. So the Soviet Union falls, and many of you heard the story. All of a sudden, the Archipova has thousands of people in the streets around it for every Jewish holiday. People didn't know the texts. They didn't know the tefillah. They didn't know anything, but they knew that it was a Jewish holiday to be able to come because all this had been wiped out for 80 years. And there was also an extraordinary moment for me that evening as well. I had the photographer there with me who wasn't Jewish, and he says to me, I feel like I'm in a foreign country. What do I do? I said, just snap pictures. Anyway, when I went to leave and walked out, people came up to me and they said, we saw you snapping photos. They said, we don't know who else was in the synagogue with us Jews. Throw away the kippah, get away from the crowds. We're all going to disperse because you never know what's going to happen. So I started to walk with the photographer to get away from the crowds, and 3 young kids come up to me and they said, we saw you in the synagogue. It is not safe for you to be walking alone like this. Let us walk down the street with you. And I thought, I don't know who these folks are. So I said to them, does anybody speak Hebrew? And one of the kids recited the Shema for me. And they ended up taking me to the next place where I wanted to go. Everything became a story. The next one. Today, there are 296 other places in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus where this picture could have been taken. Now, this also came with an extraordinary story. In St. Petersburg, I was working with a photographer there that I had found who I really liked. His name was Yuri Yermolov. I still remember Yuri. Yuri had been in jail as a protester. He was an extraordinarily interesting guy. And we actually, I think I spent 6 days in St. Petersburg, and we got to know each other quite well, went to dinners. He brought me to meet his friends, to photography studios and everything. And he was just a delight to have. He was a Russian guy. The last day there, I said, Yuri, I want to go out to the Jewish cemetery. Do you know where it is? He said, yes. So he drives me out to the Jewish cemetery, and we're taking photos. He says, come here, I have to show you something. I thought he found something. He brings me to this grave. He says, this is my grandmother's grave. I said to him, you're Jewish? And he said, my mother's mother was Jewish, and working with you this week, it's just woken up something inside of me. And the last time I've ever heard from Yuri was a postcard from Tel Aviv. Next, the Show Off Foundation. Steven Spielberg Show Off Foundation. This was a brochure that I did for them, which was aimed at young people. And I went through the archives with them, and I thought, how do I bring the archives alive in print and in a brochure? So it started out and it said, who can tell them what really happened? And then each place, what I did was I looked through the archive, and when I saw somebody's testimony that I thought was extraordinary, I sent a photographer out in different parts of Europe to take pictures. This was an extraordinary story. Who can tell them what happened here? This was a barn in a town called Yurkovo in Ukraine that this man started to, the person on the side started to tell this. No, I'm sorry, this was a picture of the family on the side. The person in the video told this story, how when the Nazis came, the people, the Jews started to run, and they ran to this farm. And this family said, we will hide you. And they dug a hole in the ground and hid them in the ground. And this is where the hole in the ground was. And I had them snap photos of all of the remaining family members of the family who hid them. And this spread told that extraordinary story. This next one, this is Sobibor. Who can tell them what happened here? And on the right, you have the person whose testimony was telling them about what happened in the fields of Sobibor when they ran out and the Jews escaped and ran through the fields. This next one, this is Vienna. And this person talked about this was the last time he had ever seen his parents, was here at the Bahnhof, at the train station in Vienna when they were taking the Jews away. And of course, it's been rebuilt today. But we said, who can tell them what happened here? And so there was a whole series of these that we had done throughout. So hold on, before I go. How am I doing on time here, Matan?
I think the answer is referred to Adina.
Dina, how am I doing on time?
I think you're doing great. Generally, we talked about around for about another 10 minutes. Does that work for you?
Fine.
Or
Yeah.
more?
Okay.
That'd be great, but just keep going.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So this was Avichai. Now, I have to tell you the story before I show you these ads. So Zalman Bernstein, Sanford Bernstein, who owned the Sanford Bernstein Company, created the Avichai Foundation, which probably has influenced Jewish day school education more than any foundation in the world, putting millions and millions into Jewish education. And so Yossi Prager, who was the president, contacted me, and Yossi and I got to know each other. And he always talked about Zalman Bernstein and Zalman Bernstein and Zalman Bernstein. Calls me one day, he says, Zalman Bernstein would like to meet you in New York. Please come to New York, and we'll have a meeting with Zalman Bernstein. So he has me meet him at the bottom of the General Motors building, right off of 59th and 5th Avenue. And I wait downstairs, and this man who's bald with a kippah shows up, and he introduces himself as Zalman Bernstein. He says, I'm going through chemotherapy. That's why I have no hair on my head. He said, let's go up and talk. We get upstairs and opens to the Sanford Bernstein Company. And all of a sudden I think to myself, Zalman Bernstein, Sanford Bernstein. Well, I guess Zalman's like the cousin who's living in Israel that Sanford Bernstein has running his foundation. So we're walking through the Sanford Bernstein Company at 9 o'clock at night, and there's still people there, and they're all paying so much deference to Zalman Bernstein that after about the fourth one, I look at him and I said to him, are you Sanford Bernstein? And he looks at me, he says, who the F do you think you're talking to? I said, Zalman Bernstein. He says, oh my God. He says, as long as you've been so truthful with me, sit down here. I want to say something to you. I said, what? He says, you are the effing mouthpiece of the left. Do you know what my politics are? I said, I guess I'm learning. And for half an hour, the man lays me out about my politics. And I said to him, is this why you brought me here? He said, half. He said, let me tell you the other half. He says, you're the spokesman for the left with your ads. He says, and you do it brilliantly. He says, I've done my homework on you. You've got 3 kids in Jewish day school. He says, you understand what's going on here. I need you. And we ended up having this incredible conversation. And his limousine takes me back to my tiny little cheap hotel in Manhattan. And I think to myself, oh, this is never going to happen. Yossi Prager calls me in the morning and says, Zalman loved you. I said, really? So they hire me to start working with them. And Zalman Bernstein was not like a laid back client. He's on me constantly. And one weekend, I'm writing a series of ads, and every 15 minutes, and this is by fax machine, faxes from Israel are coming with changes and changes and changes. And Sunday stops completely. Monday, Yossi called me. He said, Zalman died last night. I said, we were working. He said, you were the last person he was working with. Anyway, let me show you these ads. It was a tremendous learning experience for me. These were all on promoting Jewish education in the New York Times. The first one, is the New York Times really the best way for your kids to learn about Israel? Netanyahu versus Barak, Jew versus Arab, religious versus secular. Today on Israel's Independence Day, is that all your children are hearing about Israel? Maybe their only source has been a newspaper, TV show, or radio program. In America, how do young Jewish people make their first emotional connection with the Jewish homeland? Where can they learn about its history, culture, music, and achievement? Where is Israel presented to them in all its color and contradictions? In Jewish day schools. And then the ad goes on. The next one in that series. Will future generations see this as more than just a cracker? The next one in the series. They've been accepted to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and many other top universities. They know the classic texts of Western civilization, as well as the Torah and Talmudic texts of their Jewish heritage. They have a knowledge of French and Spanish, as well as Hebrew, the ancient language of their own people. They're intelligent, well-rounded, and self-aware, but they also have values that will give their lives depth and texture. They're the graduates of Jewish day schools. Aren't these the kind of people you want your kids to be? Now that I have shown you the Avichai ads, and you know that Zalman Bernstein was embracing of me even with my liberal attitudes, let me show you, and some of you are going to cringe, the New Israel Fund campaign that also went into the New York Times. So this was about the issues of Jewish pluralism, as important today as they were then. Oh, I'm sorry, this was the Jewish investment portfolio. This was the brochure that went with that last campaign. Oh, I'm sorry, hold on a second. Let me go ahead as long as I gave the introduction to that, and I'll do this one. Okay, so the first one, this was full page New York Times. The Torah should be used to bring the Jewish people together, not pull us apart. The Torah has been the great unifying force that has held us together as people for centuries. In diverse communities throughout the world, we studied the Torah and often arrived at different messages and insights. Anyway, the way I wanted to start introducing this campaign was as a unifying situation to talk about the issue of Jewish pluralism. This campaign worked exceedingly well for the New Israel Fund, and it sparked a huge discussion in America. The next one, time. It's time for American Jews to tell the Israeli government exactly what we are, Jews, okay? And this talked all about the fact that the vast majority of American Jews were members of the Reform movement, which was not accepted in Israel. The next one. The government of Israel recognizes 16 branches of Christianity, but only one branch of Judaism, Orthodoxy. Here again, folks, you can see the issue of conceptual, of creativity, of being able to say something that hits people between the eyes with emotion, with truth, that can also spark controversy We cannot be afraid to spark controversy in how we put our information out there. It's what gets people interested. Very often in Jewish nonprofits, it's let's do safety, let's be safe, let's be safe. Okay, now I want to go back to the Jerusalem Foundation. Okay, yes. So this was a brochure for the Jerusalem Foundation, and I wanted to make it sound like Jerusalem. So we had all these photos that we took of a chamsa, of spices, of tiles, of a Jerusalem stone, of an olive tree. It is a city of the heavens and a city of the earth. It is a city of timeless significance in a city of stark realities. Then we had these extraordinary spreads of well-known Jerusalemites holding different objects of Jerusalem. This was Ruti Cheshen, who was the president of the Jerusalem Foundation. Today, our work is concentrated on building bridges between different populations so we can learn to live as neighbors in one city. And then she tells the story. Next was Leah Van Leer, who has since passed on, who founded the Jerusalem, the Cinematheque. Culture strengthens the future of Jerusalem, and she's holding an Armenian tile. Anissa, notice the Armenian tile. Several of my students are on, folks, and they're from all over the world. Anissa's Armenian, she works with me and helps me, and we talk about this a lot. Next, this was the head of the YMCA, an Arab Christian man, Razik Abushar. Jerusalem's diversity has become the reason for its riches and the reasons for its suffering. And he's holding spices. Then there was Teddy Kollek, and I have to tell you, this is an incredible story. We created an opportunity for Jews and Teddy Kollek, for those of you who know, was the most famous mayor of Jerusalem. We created an opportunity for Jews and non-Jews from around the world to play a significant role in shaping Jerusalem's future. We started the Jerusalem Foundation. Anyway, we also did a video of Teddy Kollek. And I came in to speak to him, and at the time he was already living in a retirement home. And I noticed that I would start talking to him and we would be in the present and he would veer into the past. And I wasn't quite sure what his level of awareness was. And I didn't want him to come off on camera being unsure. I saw there was a Tanakh on his shelf. I pulled it off. I pulled it right out to the place where it says, Im eshkechech, Yerushalayim, if I should forget Jerusalem, may my right hand, and da-da-da. And I handed it to him and I said, can you read this with emphasis? He said, can I read this? And he belted it out like an orator. And I said to the photographer, get it, to the film guy, get it now. And it was an incredible moment. Let me just go through a few other things here. All right, one of the things I'm proudest of. This was a poster for the Jewish Agency. 13 million uncommon people, one common ground. And then on the bottom, it says the Jewish world with Israel at the center. Now, I know all my kids are on, and they may remember this. For my youngest daughter's bat mitzvah, we get off the plane at Ben Gurion, we walk into the arrivals hall, and this poster has been pulled out huge all over the walls, across everything. And I look at my kids and I said, your father did that poster. And they look at me and they go, what? I said, yes, your father did that poster, and it is greeting people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are coming to Israel. It is greeting them. So, Toda, any questions? Let me stop the share, and I'm open for things and anything that anybody wants to be able to ask.
Great. Well, Gary, this has been incredible, very enlightening and so enriching. And you really, truly have been a gift to the Jewish community as someone who leads a nonprofit and has worked in many Jewish nonprofits. Number one, I'm familiar with many of the slogans and never knew they were from you. So that's a real treat to uncover and understand and to know you in the process. Thank you so much. A couple questions came through in the chat that I want to throw at you. So a couple people asked how success of these campaigns are measured. Is there data associated with some of these or all of these? How do you really distill the impact? For us, we see them as creative and impactful, but I'm just curious, as is the audience, about the data that might support the impact of these campaigns.
Okay, so let me say several things here. What is the purpose of communication and marketing for a nonprofit or in Jewish life? Very often when I would come in, people would say, just create awareness. It took me 3 years to realize this was not my job. And I would say to people, what is the discipline of nonprofit marketing? And they'd say, just do everything you did for Coca-Cola and Apple, and that would be incredible. So for 3 years, I did that. And I could create award-winning ads and everything. And then one day I woke up and I thought, I went into this to help make serious change in results. And I'm not sure this is actually happening. And I went on to a journey in my own head saying, what is it that people really need from me, need from my skills? And I realized nonprofits needed 4 things in the end, which were the bottom lines. And this was, I could then say to clients when they brought me in, is what are you bringing me in for? You are either bringing me in because you're having a fundraising problem and you need to use communication to help you raise money. You're having an advocacy problem where you need to get people to believe in your cause, which is connected to your fundraising. You're having a participation volunteerism problem, or you are having a partnership problem where you are looking for partners. These are the 4 reasons that nonprofits market. So before you start collecting the data, you better be focused on saying, what is this about? Now, then I eventually realized there's a lot of people out there that could do advocacy, that could do participation, that could do this. Not a lot of people who were willing to throw their lot in with the fundraisers. So I really started concentrating on the communication of fundraising. So data, you have it right there. Hold on a second. There's somebody, can somebody open up their unmute themselves? Are they capable of doing that? There's somebody on here I want to have to say something. Ted Sokolsky, can you unmute yourself and just talk about that for a second? Let me see if we hear Ted. Ted was my client in Toronto for the Toronto Jewish Federation, UJA Federation of Toronto. And they were raising $400 million. And they brought me in as their communication partner. So, because let me pull back here for a second. When you ask about data, data has become the big word today. The first thing any foundation or anybody asks you these days is, what's the data that proves that this is effective? Now, I got into this discussion with Google, with the head of USC had sent me up to Google, and I was talking with the head of philanthropy at Google. And she said to me, we will no longer be supporting any organizations that cannot prove systemic change in what they're doing. We're not going to listen to anecdotes. I said, well, that's very easy when you're Google and you've got billions of dollars and you have all the mechanisms to be able to gather all the data and then to be able to analyze the data and apply the data. Most nonprofits do not have that ability. They don't know how to collect the data. And then if they do, they've got to analyze it and then they got to apply it. And that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. Are they willing to do it? Now, education can do it. Healthcare can do it because they've got that kind of money. Jewish organizations don't have that money. So they've got to look to other ways to do this unless some of their board members are willing to step up to the plate and say, here's hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to do this, and they're not. So the whole data conversation with nonprofits is very suspect. Also, the anecdote is legitimate in nonprofits because you are changing individual people's lives, and you do need to hear that, and you do want to hear that. So, and I've written articles about the issue of data. One of the things that data is doing is it's killing creativity, because you come in with an idea and a foundation says to you, where's the data that proves that the idea is going to work? Excuse me, it's a new idea. Do you want to give me hundreds of thousands of dollars to go out and implement the idea and then test it and come back to you with the data. So where everybody wants to talk data, it's a very nuanced conversation, and excuse me, filled with a lot of legitimacy and a lot of bullshit. Next question.
Gary, they unmuted me.
Oh, there you are. Okay, Ted, talk about for a second the issue of communication and fundraising. Ted has raised $400 million for when he was there and more. So Ted, just talk about this for 2 minutes.
About marketing and fundraising?
About data marketing fundraising. Okay, I want you folks to hear it from somebody very legitimate with this.
Well, some of the data counting is a little overrated. You really need an instinctual feel for how the marketing has moved your client base. So the part of our fundraising in which Gary was very involved had to do with our capital campaign, and we really tried to play our capital campaign as the Toronto Jewish Federation's participation in the fantastic growth of Toronto as a city, and that focus on new Jewish urbanism, and that was the touchstone of what we were doing. And I have no doubt that inspired our lay leadership. It inspired our philanthropists. You need to measure fundraising, particularly in the Jewish world, and particularly with capital campaigns, is about inspiring. And our work,
what Ted and I did was, okay, this is, folks, communication as opposed to advertising. Ted sent me out to meet with donors. When I started speaking with the donors, I learned something real quickly, and these were mega donors. So I go to donor one and talk with donor one.
By the way, everyone you met with has passed away since, but we won't get into that.
We'll get into that another. Ted and I became very good friends as a result of all this, folks, which is one of the wonderful benefits of having worked in the Jewish nonprofit world. I made extraordinary friendships with people because we were deeply passionate about the same issues. Anyway, so Ted sends me out to start speaking to the donors. And I speak to donor one and I get a bunch of information. I go to donor two who says, hey, I heard this is what donor one told you. Let me tell you something else. I go to donor three. Hey, I heard you spoke with donor one, number two. This goes on with 10 donors. And all of a sudden, it's like, folks, as they say in Hebrew, the asimon fell. The light bulb goes off. And I realized I can do all the ads and all the videos in the world. This isn't how they're making their decisions. They're making their decisions based on the conversations they have with one another. How do I influence those conversations? And we started a project called Conversational Dinners, where we did these prestigious 5-course dinners in people's homes, Ted and I, and we facilitated these conversations among the donors where he and I pulled out. We weren't the conversants, they were about the issues, and it was influential and essential in raising this money. So this is where communication means other things in other ways. Ted, you want to say anything else before Dina throws the next question?
I'll just say the first ad that I saw of yours was the one that turned me on and why I reached out to you. I think this is an ad you did. It had to do so much with what Federation fundraising is. You said, I think the ad went, last year, the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati raised $5 million and now it's all gone. And I just thought, so brilliant and so true, and it had a huge impact on me, and so is our friendship.
Wonderful. All right, Adita, next question. Glad to hear.
You mentioned at the top of your talk that these are really trying times for the community with anti-Semitism on the rise, questions around Israel. And a couple people have asked essentially, given that, what today, if you were hired by the Jewish community, what would be the #1 message that you would want to pursue for the community now to address the challenges that we have today?
So let me tackle this in a different way, folks, because it's not that simple. This is complex beyond complex, okay? I have been watching this as a communication person, obviously, for many years. I was involved with Brand Israel when the when they were doing this from the the foreign ministry and everything else. And I had a lot of problems with what was going on. Let me explain some things that I really believe observing this. First of all, the opposition to Israel is coordinated and centralized. It's not like the Jewish community where none of us can get in a room together. Every single Jewish organization has its answer. Every layperson has their answer and lays their money down on the table and says, I want you to do it my way. Every organization is competing against one another. This is our first problem. We cannot work as a coordinated body where Israel can do it on the battlefield. And before I said we've got two battlefields, folks, the real one, and we've got the and then we've got the media one. And the media one is affecting the whole issue of anti-Semitism in the world. We don't coordinate there. We got ourselves a major problem. So the first thing I would do is insist that there is coordination and brainstorming between the people together, because I don't have the answer, but I have several things I want to say. Now, what we don't do is we're putting out messages. This isn't working, folks. I just was reading Malcolm Hoenlein said the other day in Times of Israel, we need to do a campaign where we show them our Ethiopians, our people of color. It's like, this is so transparently not intelligent to be doing this kind of stuff, because all we need is for a couple Ethiopians to walk forward and say, you know what, there's racism in Israel too. And that blows up that campaign in 2 seconds. Plus, it also looks mercenary on our behalf. We have to be far more sophisticated and intelligent like they are. Let me tell you how sophisticated and intelligent. So there was just an article in the Los Angeles Times yesterday that the teachers union is about to pass a ruling that is pro-BDS, anti-Israel, anti-colonialism. The teachers, who have got so many other issues, all of a sudden Israel has become their issue. And they quoted who the Palestinian American is behind all this, okay? This is brilliant, folks, absolutely brilliant. And I'm gonna explain why in a minute. I wanna also put into this, you remember the what was it called? The Avi Marmara, the Turkish ship where the Israelis killed the Turks on it. This was also brilliant. Mohammed al-Dura was brilliant. What was going on? Because what this is this is where they have learned how to be able to play the international media. Let me go back, and then all of the communication follows that. Let me go back to the LA City School situation. Why this is brilliant. This was an article in the LA Times. This will be picked up more. This will start involving parents. This will start involving administration and teachers. As much as we want to be able to fight this will start to roll like a ball and start to pull the media and the news and everything else behind it. We don't do it this way. We just send out information because everybody in the Jewish community is now saying, send out the messages. It has to start with some sort of event, some sort of things that we do positive that start to move the ball. But I want to say something, folks. To talk about Israel's technologies and advancements, the world doesn't care. They care about the conflict. We have to get our hands around the conflict and its issues and what we do about it and how we present it and what happens. Otherwise, we're just looking at side things that are never going to be able to move, and we have to be strategic and creative like they are.
Thank you.
I could go on for hours, but I'm going to stop there on that one.
I have another question, and this might be the last one. And that is, we all have been taught that tension and controversy is key to getting people's attentions and is important to engage people, to hook people. You said this in the very beginning, you with your hands went like this when you were showing a visual of someone with a black eye. You brought it home. Tell us a little bit more about perhaps your most what you would deem your most controversial campaign, and how you dealt with fearlessly or confidently with being that kind of marketer or campaigner. How did you deal with the backlash or potential backlash that you might have had from the community? You mentioned a little bit about that, but I want to hear a little bit more about the controversy from you.
With a big smile on your face, Adina. Go. All right, so I want to take that question apart into two parts. Let's talk about tension first. So I've just written a book on a concept that I teach in class called the undulating space. I'm going to do a Jewish version of this eventually, and I'll explain why in a second. So my classes, well, some of them are on team creativity, because I believe, as I tell the students, who knows how to create ideas wins. Particularly today, it is all about ideas. And people don't just walk into class and become creative. You have to teach them a methodology. And I had to go back into my advertising career to say, how did ideas come about? And that became the undulating space. Students 10 years later play back to me saying it's the most important thing I learned. And so I just did a book about it, a short, I can teach it in 15 minutes. It's a 15-minute graphic book called The Undulating Space. Now, let me explain to you what this is, because it is a very Jewish concept, but I didn't realize it until about a year or two after teaching it. You have an empty box, okay? And typically what happens is information comes into that box, and the information is disparate, and it doesn't seem to connect to one another. Your job is to jump into that box, which the information comes into, and when it comes in, this disparate information, the box begins to undulate and move. I even learned how to say it in Hebrew, lehit no'ea. Anyway, it begins to undulate and move, and your job is to start going deep enough into that tension and stay there to be able to see the connections between all the disparates, which you can always find if you look deep enough. And then you stay in that tension. The deeper you're in that tension, the more creative the solution you're going to pull out of it. Tension is the absolute matter and essence of creativity. Now, what's Jewish about this? Bereshit, okay? It's the whole, I didn't realize it's the whole analogy. It starts at the beginning, you got Shemayim and Aretz. These are heaven and earth. These are disparate. They go into tohu vavohu, which is considered chaos, but I realized it's anything but chaos because it's the matter of creativity. And then all creation is pulled out of the tohu vavohu. So I'm going to do a whole Jewish version of that. Anyway, tension is absolutely necessary. How do you handle tension when it comes up? You better, there's two ways. One, you better believe in what you're doing. And two, you better be able to question what you're doing. So it's both sides of that tension. Yes, I believe it, but two, I'm never 100% sure. I'm always open to see what people are saying. Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? How can I turn this around? But people can't stand tension. That's why you see so much lousy creativity. They run out of it. And it's the same thing in controversy. It's like they can't stand the controversy. But, you know, hey, we're Jews. We live in the midst of controversy. It is part of our DNA as to who we are and what we're doing. So you're always living in the balance and you're constantly trying to deal with it.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect way to end, to leave us with thinking about the importance of tension, how to channel that tension into positive ways. Certainly been part of our narrative, as you described, as a Jewish people, part of what we're experiencing even to this day. And hopefully we can all be guided by you and make that tension meaningful, positive, and effectuate positive change in the way that you have. So thank you, Gary, very much. Before we close out, I just want
I just want to say something. Thank you to the library. You have no idea. It's special. I'm turning 70 this month. And actually, according to the Jewish calendar, my 70th birthday was Thursday. So I thought, isn't that deeply connected to this archive and to this presentation? So this was an incredible birthday gift. Thank you to all of you. And thank you to all of you who showed up to be able to do this. It has a lot of meaning in my life.
Matan, it's been wonderful to partner with you in the archive series. And I thank you all very much.
Thank you, Adina. Thank you, everyone.
The microphones are open.
If anyone would like to say a few words to Gary, feel free. This is the fun social time.
Gary, hi, it's Judith and Ephraim from Jerusalem.
You know what, Judith, I've got to say something. When I saw your name on here, I was so excited and appreciative. And Ephraim, glad to see you looking healthy. That's wonderful to see. Judith is the most incredible Jewish artist in the Jewish world. I've got one of her things right up here on my wall. Wait a second, Judith.
Yeah.
This was a birthday present to me from Judith. Judith and my wife bought.
It was really great, Gary, to see the examples of the work that I was fortunate to be able to work with you on in those early days. It was really amazing experience, and I learned so much from you about the idea of the concept, and that went with me in the rest of my career. Really appreciate it.
Ephraim, thank you. The work that I showed at the beginning, the Cage Conference stuff, Ephraim actually produced.
Okay. Yom Huledet Sameach.
Toda rabba.
Hi, Gary.
Ad 120.
Toda rabba.
We need you here.
It was great, Gary. Thanks for sharing.
Gary, you always impress me. I'm always thrilled to be your cousin. Thank you. This is wonderful.
My grandson Isaac. Hi, Isaac Cole.
I wrote something on the group chat for Glampy. I love you.
Okay. I love you, Isaac.
Yeah, I won.
Camera.
Didn't mean to.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you,
It's really
Gary.
wonderful.
Goodbye.
Thank
Gary,
you.
thank you.
Oh, Naomi, thank you. a
Gary,
million
it was
times.
great, yeah, Gary.
Thank you. I can't wait to come to Shabbat dinner at your house. Thank you. I love you. Thank you for making
We
this happen.
love you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Gary, that was really good.
Thank you,
That was
Anissa.
amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.